What we're about to tell you sounds like something from a Hollywood thriller, but it happened in real life. Picture this. A beautiful blonde woman arrives at a military compound in West Africa, carrying medical supplies and wearing the smile of an angel. She speaks perfect French, has flawless credentials, and claims she's there to help children. But one man, a battle-hardened leader who's seen too much deception in his lifetime, notices something others don't. Her timing is too perfect, her story too clean, and when he decides to dig deeper, what he discovers will shock you. This is the story of how a single question exposed an international spy operation, and how sometimes the most dangerous enemies come disguised as your greatest friends. The dust hadn't settled from the morning convoy when she appeared like a mirage against the scorching Burkina Faso horizon. The white UN truck kicked up clouds of red earth as it approached the heavily fortified compound, its engine struggling against the oppressive heat that made even seasoned soldiers seek shade. But inside that vehicle sat someone who seemed untouched by the harsh African sun, a woman whose composure was as perfect as her cover story. Dr. Sarah Magnuson stepped down from the truck with the graceful confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Her blonde hair, braided with military precision, caught the sunlight as she surveyed the compound with eyes that missed nothing while pretending to see only what a humanitarian should notice. She wore the standard-issue khaki field uniform of international aid workers, but something about the way she carried herself suggested training that went far beyond medical school. In her hands, she cradled a pristine white plastic crate marked with bold red lettering. Emergency medical supplies, UNICEF authorized, handle with care. The box appeared heavy, and she handled it with the reverence of someone carrying life-saving medicine to desperate people. But appearances, as the world was about to learn, could be devastatingly deceptive. Colonel Ibrahim Traoré stood motionless in the shadow of the compound's main building, his dark eyes tracking every movement of this unexpected visitor. At 38, Traoré had already lived through 3 coups, countless border skirmishes, and enough betrayals to fill several lifetimes. His weathered face bore the scars of a man who had learned to trust his instincts above all else, and, right now, those instincts were screaming warnings that his rational mind was still trying to process. The timing bothered him most. Just 72 hours earlier, he had convened a classified meeting with his most trusted advisors to discuss intelligence reports about foreign surveillance operations in the region. The meeting had been held in absolute secrecy, with phones confiscated and the room swept for electronic devices. Only 6 people knew the details of what had been discussed. Yet here was this woman, arriving unannounced with aid that nobody had requested, just days after that meeting had taken place. Coincidences, in Traoré's experience, were usually anything but coincidental. Dr. Magnuson approached the compound gates with the measured stride of someone accustomed to entering hostile territory while maintaining the illusion of peaceful intent. Her smile was professionally warm, not too bright to seem fake, not too subdued to appear unfriendly. It was the kind of smile that had been practiced in front of mirrors and perfected through countless field operations that the public would never hear about. "Good afternoon," she called out in flawless French, her accent carrying the refined tones of someone educated in Paris's finest institutions. "I am Dr. Sarah Magnuson from the International Medical Relief Coalition. We received reports of a potential health crisis in this region and have come to offer our assistance." The guards at the gate exchanged glances, their hands instinctively moving closer to their weapons. They had been trained to be suspicious of unexpected visitors, especially ones who arrived without prior coordination. But this woman didn't look like a threat. She looked like salvation in khaki clothing. Traoré stepped forward from the shadows, his presence immediately commanding attention from both his soldiers and the unexpected visitor. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a recognition that went beyond simple introduction. She saw a man who had survived by questioning everything, and he saw someone whose perfect exterior concealed depth that humanitarian, Work alone couldn't explain. "Doctor," he said, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I am Colonel Traoré. We were not expecting medical assistance today." Her smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes, a microsecond of calculation that someone less observant might have missed entirely. "Colonel, humanitarian crises don't always announce themselves in advance. When we received intelligence about potential disease outbreaks in this region, we felt it was our duty to respond immediately. Every hour of delay could mean lives lost." The word intelligence hung in the air between them, like smoke from a barely extinguished fire. Traoré filed it away in the growing list of details that didn't quite fit the narrative being presented to him. "What specific intelligence?" he asked, his tone remaining conversational, but his eyes never leaving her face. For the first time since her arrival, Dr. Magnuson hesitated. It was barely perceptible, a pause that lasted perhaps half a second longer than natural conversation would typically allow. But it was enough to confirm Traoré's growing suspicions that this woman was not what she appeared to be. "Reports from regional health monitoring stations," she replied smoothly, her recovery so seamless that most people would have missed the momentary uncertainty entirely. "Increased incidences of fever, respiratory distress, symptoms consistent, with potentially serious infectious diseases. We have mobile testing equipment and can begin immediate screenings if you'll permit us access to the local population." Traoré nodded slowly, appearing to consider her offer while actually analyzing every aspect of her presentation. Her story was plausible, her credentials appeared authentic, and her concern seemed genuine. Yet something fundamental didn't align. With his understanding of how international aid organizations actually operated in this region, "These health monitoring stations," he said carefully. "Which specific facilities provided these reports?" Again, that microscopic hesitation. "I would need to check my documentation for the exact facility names, Colonel. The reports came through our Central Coordination Office in Ouagadougou. If you'd like, I can radio our headquarters for the specific details." What she didn't realize was that Traoré maintained contact with every legitimate health facility within a 200-kilometer radius of his position. There had been no reports of disease outbreaks, no unusual patterns of illness, and no requests for international medical intervention. Her story, however expertly crafted, was built on a foundation that didn't exist. But instead of confronting her immediately, Traoré made a decision that would later prove crucial to exposing the full scope of whatever operation she represented. He would let her continue, but under careful observation, until she revealed her true purpose. "Doctor, we appreciate any assistance you can provide," he said, stepping aside to allow her entry into the compound. "We have a medical facility where you can set up your equipment. I'll assign someone to help you get established." Relief flowed across her features so briefly that most observers would have interpreted it as simple gratitude. But Traoré recognized it for what it actually was, the satisfaction of someone whose deception had successfully cleared its first major hurdle. As they walked through the compound, Dr. Magnuson maintained a steady stream of professional conversation, asking about local population density, recent health concerns, and logistical considerations for setting up medical screening stations. Her questions were exactly what a legitimate aid worker would ask, delivered with the appropriate level of concern and expertise. But Traoré noticed other things. The way her eyes automatically catalogued defensive positions and communications equipment. How her casual glances consistently focused on areas that would be strategically significant to someone conducting surveillance rather than medical operations. The manner in which she held her medical supply crate, protective in a way that suggested its contents were far more valuable than basic medicines and testing equipment. The compound's medical facility was a modest building that served the EHOI basic health needs of military personnel and occasional civilian emergencies. Dr. Magnuson examined the space with what appeared to be professional assessment, but Traoré caught her paying particular attention to power sources, communication, lines and sight lines to other critical areas of the compound. "This will work perfectly," she announced, setting her crate down on the central examination table with careful precision. "I'll need about an hour to set up our equipment and calibrate the testing devices. Would it be possible to begin screening your personnel this afternoon? Early detection is crucial for containment if we're dealing with an infectious agent." Traoré agreed to her timeline, while mentally noting how quickly she wanted to begin whatever her actual mission entailed. Genuine. Medical aid operations typically required extensive setup periods, coordination with local authorities, and careful planning. Her eagerness to begin immediate operations suggested motivations that extended beyond humanitarian concerns. He assigned Sergeant Konaté, one of his most observant and trustworthy soldiers, to assist Dr. Magnuson with whatever she needed while maintaining subtle surveillance of her activities. Konaté was instructed to be helpful and accommodating, while noting every detail of what she actually did versus what she claimed to be doing. Left alone in the medical facility, Dr. Magnuson began unpacking her supplies with the efficiency of someone who had performed this routine many times before. But as Sergeant Konaté later reported, her actions didn't match those of a medical professional setting up diagnostic equipment. Instead of focusing on the medical supplies that occupied the top layer of her crate, she spent considerable time examining what appeared to be electronic equipment concealed beneath the legitimate medical materials. She assembled what looked like communication devices, though she was careful to keep them hidden from casual observation. Most tellingly, she spent nearly 20 minutes positioning and repositioning a device that bore no resemblance to any medical equipment Konaté had ever seen. It was small, sophisticated, and equipped with what appeared to be multiple antennae arrays, the kind of device used for signal transmission rather than patient diagnosis. While Dr. Magnuson worked, Traoré conducted his own investigation into her background and credentials. The International Medical Relief Coalition was a legitimate organization, and Dr. Sarah Magnuson was indeed listed among their personnel. Her medical degrees from the University of Stockholm appeared authentic, and her employment history with various humanitarian organizations seemed appropriately extensive. But Traoré had learned long ago that the most effective deceptions were built around cores of truth. The question wasn't whether Dr. Magnuson was a real doctor. It was whether being a doctor was her primary occupation, or simply excellent cover for other activities. He placed a call to a contact in European intelligence services, someone who owed him favors from previous cooperation on regional security matters. The conversation was brief and conducted in code that would be meaningless to casual listeners, but the information he received confirmed his growing suspicions. Dr. Sarah Magnuson was indeed a medical professional, but her humanitarian work frequently took her to regions experiencing political instability or strategic importance to various intelligence agencies. Her travel patterns over the past 5 years showed a curious tendency to arrive in areas just before or after significant military or political developments. Most intriguingly, several of her previous humanitarian missions had coincided with intelligence-gathering operations that had later provided crucial information to Western military and diplomatic efforts. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, too sophisticated to be accidental. As afternoon descended into evening, Dr. Magnuson completed her setup and requested permission to begin medical screenings the following morning. She appeared tired from her journey and her setup efforts, asking for quarters where she could rest and prepare for the next day's work. Traoré provided her with comfortable accommodations in the compound's guest facility, ensuring she had everything she needed while also ensuring she remained under constant but subtle observation. He assigned rotating guards who were instructed to maintain security while appearing to provide simple hospitality to their guest. That night, as Dr. Magnuson settled into her temporary quarters, she had no way of knowing that her every movement was being monitored by soldiers trained in surveillance techniques, or that the walls of her room contained listening devices that would capture every sound she made. What those devices recorded over the next several hours would provide the final confirmation of Traoré's suspicions and set in motion events that would expose an international espionage operation of startling sophistication. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Long after the compound had settled into its nighttime routine, sensors detected unusual electronic activity from Dr. Magnuson's quarters. She was transmitting data using equipment that bore no resemblance to anything a medical professional would typically carry. The transmission lasted exactly 7 minutes and was directed toward a satellite communication array that intelligence analysis later revealed belonged to a European intelligence consortium. The data being transmitted included detailed information about the compound's layout, defensive capabilities, personnel numbers, and communications infrastructure. Information that would be invaluable to anyone planning future operations against Traoré's forces. But perhaps most damning was a coded report that referenced Nightingale Protocol initiated and primary target confirmed accessible. The language was unmistakably operational rather than medical, suggesting that Dr. Magnuson's mission extended far beyond providing humanitarian assistance. Traoré received this intelligence briefing at 3 a.m., confirming what his instincts had been telling him since the moment this woman had arrived at his compound. She wasn't just a spy, she was part of a larger operation designed to gather intelligence about his capabilities and potentially prepare for more aggressive actions against his position. The question now was how to handle this situation in a way that would expose the full scope of her mission, while sending a clear message to whoever had sent her that such deceptions would not be tolerated. As dawn broke over the compound, Dr. Magnuson emerged from her quarters, appearing refreshed and ready to begin her stated mission of providing medical assistance to local personnel. She greeted the soldiers she encountered with professional warmth, inquiring about their health and expressing enthusiasm for the screening work she planned to conduct. But Traoré was ready for her, armed with evidence that would shatter her, carefully constructed deception, and reveal the truth about her presence in his compound. The confrontation, when it came, would be conducted with the methodical precision of a master strategist who had learned that the most effective way to defeat deception was not through anger or accusations, but through the inexorable presentation of irrefutable truth. Dr. Magnuson had just finished setting up what appeared to be a mobile diagnostic station when Traoré entered the medical facility, followed by 2 of his most trusted officers. She looked up from her work with the bright smile of someone genuinely excited to begin helping people, completely unaware that her carefully maintained cover was about to be systematically dismantled. "Good morning, Colonel," she said cheerfully. "I'm ready to begin screenings whenever it's convenient for your personnel. I thought we might start with your officers, then work our way through the general population. Early detection really is crucial for preventing any potential outbreak from spreading." Traoré nodded slowly, his expression giving away nothing of what he had learned during the night. "Doctor, before we begin, I wonder if you might help me understand something about your equipment." He gestured toward her diagnostic setup, which appeared to be standard field medical equipment to untrained eyes. But Traoré's question wasn't about the medical devices she had displayed prominently on the examination table. "Certainly, Colonel. What would you like to know?" "I'm curious about the device you assembled last night at approximately 11:30 p.m., he said calmly, watching her face carefully for any reaction. "The one with multiple antenna arrays that transmitted data for exactly 7 minutes to coordinates that correspond to European satellite communications networks." The change in Dr. Magnuson's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warm smile remained in place, but something shifted behind her eyes, a recognition that her situation had fundamentally changed in ways she was still trying to process. "I'm not sure what you mean, Colonel," she replied, her voice maintaining its professional calm while her mind raced to understand how her covert transmission had been detected. "I didn't use any communication equipment last night. I was simply preparing my medical supplies and reviewing patient screening protocols." Traoré walked slowly to her supply crate, which still sat on the examination table where she had left it after unpacking her medical equipment. With deliberate care, he began removing the legitimate medical supplies from the top layer, setting them aside with the respect due to genuine humanitarian materials. "Doctor, I have great respect for medical professionals who dedicate their lives to helping others," he said as he worked. My own sister is a nurse who has served in refugee camps across West Africa. I understand the dedication and sacrifice required for genuine humanitarian work. Dr. Magnuson watched nervously as he continued removing medical supplies, knowing that he was approaching the concealed equipment that would prove her deception. Colonel, I appreciate your respect for medical work, but I'm not sure why you're examining my supplies in this manner. Because, Traoré replied, lifting away the final layer of medical materials to reveal the sophisticated electronic equipment hidden beneath. I believe you are insulting the memory of every genuine humanitarian who has ever risked their life to help others by using their noble profession as cover for espionage operations. The exposed equipment was unmistakably designed for intelligence, gathering and communication rather than medical diagnosis. Compact but sophisticated, it represented technology that would be available only to well-funded intelligence organizations rather than humanitarian groups. Dr. Magnuson stared at the exposed equipment, her mind calculating options and outcomes, with the speed of someone trained to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. But she was trapped by the evidence of her own actions, and denial was no longer a viable strategy. Colonel, I can explain, she began, but Traoré raised a hand to interrupt her. Doctor, or whoever you actually are, I'm going to give you an opportunity that you don't deserve, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I'm going to allow you to tell me the truth about your mission, your objectives, and the organization you represent. If you choose to continue lying, I will present the evidence I have gathered to international media outlets and let the world judge your actions. The weight of her situation settled over Dr. Magnuson like a heavy blanket. She had been trained for hostile interrogations, prepared for situations where her cover might be compromised, but she had not expected to face someone with Traoré's combination of intelligence, resources, and strategic thinking. What evidence? She asked, stalling for time while trying to assess her remaining options. Traoré nodded to one of his officers, who stepped forward with a folder containing photographs, electronic intercepts, and communication logs. The documentation was comprehensive and damning, providing irrefutable proof of her covert activities. Satellite imagery of your transmission equipment being deployed, Traoré began, showing her the first photograph. Electronic intercepts of your coded communications with European intelligence networks. Analysis of the data you transmitted, including detailed intelligence about this compound's defenses and personnel. Each piece of evidence he presented further demolished any possibility of maintaining her cover story. The documentation was too complete, too specific, and too professionally compiled to be dismissed or explained away. But perhaps most importantly, Traoré continued, we have recordings of your activities from the moment you arrived at this compound. Every conversation, every action, every covert transmission has been documented and analyzed. Dr. Magnuson sank into a chair, the weight of her exposed deception finally overwhelming her training and determination. She had been caught completely, professionally, and with evidence that would be impossible to refute or spin in her favor. What do you want from me? She asked quietly, her voice lacking the confident authority she had displayed since her arrival. I want the truth, Traoré replied simply. Who sent you? What was your mission? What organization do you really represent? And what were your actual objectives in infiltrating this compound? The silence stretched between them as Dr. Magnuson weighed her remaining options. She could continue to deny everything, knowing that the evidence against her was overwhelming. She could attempt to negotiate some kind of arrangement that might minimize the consequences of her exposure. Or she could acknowledge that her situation was hopeless and attempt to salvage what dignity remained by finally telling the truth. My name is Sarah Magnuson, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I am a medical doctor, and I have worked with humanitarian organizations. But you're right. That's not why I'm here. Traoré waited patiently for her to continue, understanding that breaking through years of training and conditioning would require time and careful handling. I work for a European intelligence consortium that monitors political and military developments. In regions of strategic interest, she continued, each word seeming to cost her considerable effort. My medical background provides excellent cover for accessing sensitive areas and gathering intelligence that would be difficult to obtain through conventional espionage methods. What was your specific mission here? Traoré asked. To assess your compound's defensive capabilities, document your personnel numbers and equipment, and evaluate potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations, she replied, her professional training finally overridden by the futility of continued deception. Future operations of what nature? Dr. Magnuson looked up at him with eyes that reflected both defeat and a grudging respect for the thoroughness with which he had exposed her mission. I don't know the specifics of what was being planned. My role was intelligence gathering, not operational planning, but the information I was tasked to collect would be valuable for anyone considering military or covert action against your position. The implications of her admission settled over the room like a dark cloud. This hadn't been a simple intelligence gathering operation. It had been preparation for potential hostile action against Traoré and his forces. Who authorized this mission? Traoré pressed. I can't tell you that, she replied, some of her resolve returning. Whatever consequences I face for being exposed, they would be nothing compared to what would happen if I revealed operational details about my organization. Traoré understood her position, but he also understood that her refusal to provide complete information limited his options for resolving this situation quietly. If she wouldn't cooperate fully, he would have to pursue other methods of sending his message to whoever had sent her. Doctor, I'm going to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider your position, he said calmly. You have been caught conducting espionage operations against a sovereign military installation. The evidence against you is overwhelming and will be released to international media unless you provide complete cooperation regarding your mission and the organization that sent you. She shook her head slowly, her training finally reasserting itself now that the initial shock of exposure had passed. I cannot and will not provide information that would compromise ongoing operations or endanger other personnel. That's not negotiable, regardless of the consequences. Traoré nodded, having expected this response but hoping she might choose differently. Then we proceed to the next phase of resolving this situation. He gestured to his officers, who began setting up video recording equipment while maintaining professional demeanor throughout the process. Dr. Magnuson watched with growing alarm as she realized that her exposure was about to become very public. Colonel, please reconsider, she said urgently. If you release this information, it will destroy my career, endanger my family, and potentially compromise other legitimate humanitarian operations that have nothing to do with intelligence work. Doctor, those are consequences you should have considered before accepting a mission that used humanitarian work as cover for espionage, Traoré replied without sympathy. Your actions don't just compromise your own integrity, they endanger every legitimate aid worker who operates in regions like this by creating suspicion and distrust toward genuine humanitarian efforts. The recording equipment was now operational, with multiple cameras positioned to document both Traoré's statement and Dr. Magnuson's presence as evidence of the espionage operation that had been exposed. Ladies and gentlemen, Traoré began, addressing the camera directly while maintaining the authoritative presence that had made him respected throughout the region. What you are about to see is evidence of a sophisticated intelligence operation that used humanitarian aid as cover for espionage activities against a sovereign military installation. He gestured toward Dr. Magnuson, who sat motionless in her chair, understanding that her situation had moved beyond salvage or negotiation. This woman arrived at our compound claiming to be Dr. Sarah Magnuson, representing the International Medical Relief Coalition and offering emergency medical assistance for a supposed disease outbreak. Her credentials appeared authentic. Her story seemed plausible, and her stated mission aligned with legitimate humanitarian concerns. Traoré moved to the examination table, where her exposed equipment provided visual evidence of the deception that had been uncovered. However, investigation revealed that no disease outbreak had been reported by regional health authorities, no medical assistance had been requested, and this woman's actual activities involved sophisticated intelligence gathering using equipment designed for surveillance and covert communication rather than medical diagnosis. He lifted one of the concealed communication devices, displaying it clearly for the cameras. This equipment was used to transmit classified information about our compound's defenses, personnel, and capabilities to foreign intelligence networks. The data transmission occurred under cover of darkness and used satellite communication arrays operated by European intelligence organizations. Dr. Magnuson understood that her exposure was now complete and irreversible. Her mission had failed. Catastrophically, her cover was destroyed, and the consequences would extend far beyond her personal situation. The individual responsible for this operation has confirmed that she is indeed a medical doctor who has worked with humanitarian organizations. But she has also acknowledged that her primary purpose here was intelligence gathering in preparation for potential future operations against our position. Traoré paused, allowing the implications of this revelation to sink in for viewers who would later see this recording. This represents a particularly dangerous form of deception because it exploits the trust and goodwill that legitimate humanitarian organizations depend upon to carry out their vital work. When espionage operations use humanitarian cover, they endanger every genuine aid worker who serves in conflict zones by creating suspicion and distrust toward people whose only motivation is helping others. He turned back toward Dr. Magnuson, who had remained silent throughout his statement. The evidence of this espionage operation will be released to international media outlets, so that the global community can understand how humanitarian missions are being compromised by intelligence agencies willing to exploit one of humanity's most noble professions for covert political and military objectives. The recording concluded with documentation of the equipment and evidence that had been gathered, providing irrefutable proof of the intelligence operation that had been exposed and defeated. Within hours of the recording's completion, copies were distributed to major international news organizations, online media platforms, and diplomatic channels that would ensure global distribution of the evidence. The story spread rapidly through social media networks, generating widespread discussion about the ethics of using humanitarian cover for intelligence operations. Dr. Sarah Magnuson was quietly repatriated to Europe through diplomatic channels. Her career in both medicine and intelligence work effectively ended by the comprehensive exposure of her mission. The organizations she had worked for officially denied any knowledge of her espionage activities, while privately acknowledging that one of their most effective operatives had been neutralized by someone far more sophisticated than they had anticipated. But the broader implications of this incident extended far beyond the fate of a single compromised operative. Traoré's handling of the situation sent a clear message to intelligence agencies worldwide that deceptive operations using humanitarian cover would be exposed and publicized rather than handled through quiet diplomatic channels. The comprehensive documentation and professional presentation of evidence demonstrated capabilities that many had underestimated, forcing a reassessment of approaches to intelligence gathering in regions under his influence. For legitimate humanitarian organizations, the incident highlighted the damage that espionage operations using medical or aid worker cover could inflict on their ability to operate effectively in conflict zones. The exposure of Dr. Magnuson's mission reinforced suspicions that some aid workers might have ulterior motives, making genuine humanitarian work more difficult and dangerous. But perhaps most significantly, the incident established Traoré's reputation as someone who could not be deceived by even the most sophisticated intelligence operations. His combination of strategic thinking, thorough investigation, and decisive action when faced with deception became a model for other leaders dealing with similar challenges. The story of Dr. Sarah Magnuson's failed mission spread throughout intelligence circles as a cautionary tale about underestimating opponents and the dangers of using humanitarian cover for covert operations. It became required reading in training programs designed to prepare operatives for increasingly sophisticated opposition in regions where traditional intelligence gathering methods were no longer sufficient. Years later, when intelligence historians analyzed the incident, they identified it as a turning point in the relationship between intelligence agencies and the regions they sought to monitor. The comprehensive exposure of Dr. Magnuson's mission demonstrated that even the most carefully planned and expertly executed deception could be defeated by someone with the right combination of instincts, resources, and determination to uncover the truth. The white plastic crate that had contained her medical supplies and sophisticated espionage equipment was preserved as evidence, a tangible reminder that in a world where deception often wears the mask of compassion, vigilance and wisdom remain the most reliable defenses against those who would exploit humanity's better instincts for darker purposes. And in the compound where it all began, soldiers still tell the story of the day their commander saw through the smile of an angel and exposed the devil's work hidden beneath layers of carefully crafted lies. What would you have done in Traoré's position? How do you think intelligence agencies should be held accountable when they exploit humanitarian work for espionage? Share your thoughts below. And if this story opened your eyes to the complex world of modern espionage hidden behind legitimate organizations, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines.